Hello, welcome to the first part of the pile optimization process. In this first segment, we're going to be getting our boundaries. Now, there's a lot of great software on the market that specialize in GIS and site analysis, and we recommend you use your GIS platform of choice. PV Farm is compatible with all major formats, but today we're going to be working with getting a KMZ or KML file from Google Earth. Now, I am going to be using the web version. This process will work the same with Google Earth Pro. And of course, this is a process that would usually probably be done with a lot more analysis by a civil engineer. PV Farm does not have GIS capability. So for this, we're going to be kind of doing it on the fly and get some general boundaries going. So the first thing we're going to be doing is drawing inclusion and exclusion zones. Inclusion being these nice big areas we see here where we can put stuff. Exclusion being areas like this lake here, where we're probably not going to be putting any solar arrays on top of. To do this, we're going to come up to Add, and we're going to select Path or Polygon. So what we want to do is we want to be making polygons. We definitely don't want any open paths. So if you're using Google Earth Pro, I believe there's a way to select polygon only. For this web version, what we're going to do is we're going to put our points, and when we're ready to close the shape, we hover over the first point and select Close Shape and make sure it looks like this as a closed polygon. We do this because if the shape isn't closed and we bring it into PV Farm, the program won't be able to tell what's outside and what's inside of the boundary, so it needs to be closed. So let's get rid of this. So let's start to make our first exclusion zone. We're going to come up here to Add, Path or Polygon, and let's just go around Lake Hammonasset here. Now I'm going to try and do this a little bit offset, since we probably don't want to be placing any arrays right up next to the water. And of course, you can do this as detailed or as generic as you would like, whatever works best for your workflow. You could just do a big box over this whole thing, or we could come in and be a little more exact with it. For example, I could have probably come down here and really traced along, but I don't think we're going to be putting any arrays right there. So I'm going to just kind of go over it. Okay, so now we've put down our final point. We're going to hover over to the first point, and we're going to make sure it says close shape, and we have our first closed shape. So we're going to save that to project, which we need to make first. Once we have our first exclusion zone, what we're going to do is we're going to name it, and we want to name it something that's going to be easily identifiable, because once we have these zones in PV Farm, you're not going to see this image behind it. So we're going to name this, you could name it Lake, you could name it Exclusion, whatever is going to work best for you. All right, so once we've got it saved, we can exit out of that, and we can go around and let's add some more exclusion zones and then come right back. So skipping forward a little bit, I've got a bunch of exclusion zones made here. So now the best practice is going to be to come over here and hit Add Folder, and we're going to name this folder Exclusion. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to select all of these, and we're going to drag them and put them in this folder here. So all of our exclusion zones are in one place for sorting purposes. This will also help with overlapping issues that I've particularly noticed in Google Earth Pro. So it's generally a good practice to keep our inclusion and exclusion zones in different folders like this. So now next thing we're going to do is we're going to start drawing our inclusion zones. And what we're going to be doing is the same process. So we can add, or even just, there's a little shortcut right here. And we're just going to come around anything that looks like buildable area. We're just going to draw a shape, and don't worry about if the exclusion zones are included in this area, because as the name suggests, they will be excluded from solar arrays being put on them. Okay, and just like with before, make sure we have a closed shape. And now before we save to project, this would be a chance to come in and make any edits. You can scooch these points around if we need to. Maybe come down here. If there's something we need to get rid of, you can delete one of those points. And once we have a nice big area, we're going to save to project. We'll name it buildable area or inclusion, whatever works best for your workflow. And then let's go ahead and put one more in this little area down here for our buildable area. Okay, and same thing as before. We're going to save to project, area. Okay. Okay, so now we've got a couple nice big buildable areas here. So we're going to do our folder. We're going to call this inclusion. We're going to drag these two, put them in the inclusion folder. Now, obviously, this is a pretty large and maybe not super realistic area, but I just really want to get a lot of diversity in the type of terrain that we're going to be seeing. And of course, we can always whittle this down and add more exclusion as we go. And now you'll notice there is a lot of overlap going on here. There's even some zones that are kind of half in, half out of the other zones. That's perfectly okay. Since these are all closed polygons, the system will be able to parse out which section is which. And like I said, there is some overlapping that happens with Google Earth Pro, but as long as we have our folders here, the system will be able to tell which area is in which folder. So now that we've got both of our inclusion and exclusion folders ready to export, you're going to come right up here to where these three dots are, and we're going to export as KML file. That will automatically download, and then we're going to switch over to PV Farm. So now that we've switched over to PV Farm, we're going to create a new project, and then we're going to go into it, and we're going to come up to Project, Import, and we're going to bring in that KML file that we just made. So there are two ways you can do this. You can either drag and drop it from a file explorer, or you can go into Browse, and we can select it that way. Hit OK, exit out of that. Now, if you hit the 2 button, that will make everything flat and on a 2D plane. And then the F button will zoom out so that we can see everything that's in our scene. As you can see, we've got our nice zones here. And if you click on one of them and come over here to Object Details, it looks like a cube with some parentheses around it. Out of the box, you'll probably see it over on this side of the screen. If you open it and go to these 3 dots here, you can decide where you want that to be located. It could even be floating. I personally prefer to have it over here so that it's always on hand. Now, if you look right here under name, you see that this is the first one we made, lake/exclusion. So that is how we're going to be able to tell what each of these items are. What we need to do now is we need to assign each of these boundaries a job. So we're going to come over here, explode that out. This is the Model Explorer, same as with the object details. You'll probably find it over here, but it can be moved wherever. And the Object Explorer is just going to list everything that's in this scene. So let's go ahead and click these and hold down Shift. And let's get all of the exclusion zones. So now you can see they've all been selected. They're all a different color. And with all of them selected, we're going to come over to Object Details again. And right down here towards the bottom under Boundary Type, we're going to change it from Include to Exclude. And then just so that we have a visual of that, let's change the color to be red. Okay, and then for these other ones, the 2 buildable areas, if we go into Object Details, you'll notice we don't actually have to change anything. It is automatically set to Include. So now there you have it. We have our boundaries ready to go. So what we need to do next is come over here to the Project tab, and we're going to click where it says Project Version, and we're going to save a version. We're going to name the project Chatfield Hollow, since that's the site name. The status is set to active, and we're going to change the availability to company. This allows other collaborators in your organization to see this project on their dashboard. And then from here, if you wanted to add a description, we could put boundaries imported. And we're going to add version. So these versions are saved independently for each user. So as we're going through our process, you can always roll back to any of these versions. So it is definitely a good idea to save versions as often as possible. So now we've got our version saved. We click out, and you see now our project name is Chatfield Hollow. Now we're ready to move on to part 2 of the pile optimization process.